comparison between 2024 and 2023. So on Kawai, a lot less number of sales, but similar kind of proportion. There were less sales, 7,600 sales. They really haven't recovered since COVID, and it's always a very, very small amount. Which island has the least out-of-state buyers, and then which ones has the least? Hey, what's happening, friends? A question that we get a lot about Hawaii real estate is how many people are buying from out of state, or how many people are buying from an international country. And it's interesting because I think a lot of times there's a misunderstanding and people really overestimate the amount of buyers that are coming from somewhere else. And so I've got my hands on some good data from one of our title companies here, Title Guarantee, about where buyers come from for the first half of this year. So this is the cumulative data from January to June of this year that breaks down where buyers are coming from in the state of Hawaii. So let's bring up the data here and let's go through it. And if you stay to the end, I'm going to run through by island, which island has the least out-of-state buyers and then which ones has the least. And so starting off with just the overall statewide summary, this slide shows you a comparison between 2024 and 2023 on how many sales happen overall. So in 2024, year to date, January to June, there was 8,368 sales. That was 72% of those buyers were coming from within the state, 26% were coming from somewhere in the United States, and just 2% were international buyers. And if we compare that to 23, there were less sales, 7,600 sales, but almost the same proportion of buyers coming from different places. So 74% of buyers were coming from within the state, 24% from the mainland, and then 2% were international. The interesting piece of data here, and we'll look at this island by island, is that if you look at the sales volume, it's clear that out-of-state buyers are buying higher priced properties because the sales volume, if you look at it as a percentage of sales volume, out of the $7.5 billion in real estate that was sold, 33% of it were out of state and 3% of it were international. So it tells you that out of state and international buyers are buying at higher price points because the number of sales is a lower proportion and the number of the sales volume percentage is higher. So that's an interesting little statistic to look at statewide. And so we'll go island by island here. And the first island is Oahu. So on Oahu, it's the smallest number. So the least amount of out-of-state buyers are buying on the island of Oahu. So if you look at this, out of 5,100 sales, 81% of them were people coming from within the islands, 16% were outside of the islands, and then 3% were international. Almost exactly the same if you look at the percentages from 2023. There was 81% from inside the state, 17% from outside the state, and 2% were international. And if you look at the sales volume figures here, very similar in terms of the percentages for just Oahu. So you'll see that change as we get to the other islands. So that's Oahu. They have the lowest number of non-Hawaii buyers. We're going to jump to Maui now. So on Maui, it gets larger, right? So 68% were from inside the state, 29% were from outside the state, and 3% were international. And if you look at 2023, pretty same in terms of the percentages, 68, 30, and 2 were international. But if you look at sales volume, bigger increase, right? So 29% for number of sales, but 44% were out of state buyers when you look at it as a percentage of sales volume, and same thing for 2023. And then we go to Kawai. So on Kawai, a lot less number of sales, but similar kind of proportions, 65% within the islands and the state, 34% outside. And actually, there weren't any international buyers this year so far on Kawai. And it was only 1% international. Last year, 41% were from outside the state and 58% were from inside the state. And if you look, same kind of trend here, that if you look at it as sales volume, a larger percentage, right? 53% were from out of state in terms of the sales volume figure. So they are purchasing at a higher price point, which makes up a larger proportion of the sales volume. And then finally, we get to the island of Hawaii. And if you look on the Big Island, we have the most out of state buyers on the Big Island. So 53% were from within the islands, 46% were out of state, and 1% was international. And then last year in 2023, there were actually more in-state buyers, 63%, 36% were from out of state, 1% were international. And we see that same type of increase on the sales volume side of it, where it was 46% of total sales, but actually 62% of the sales volume came from out-of-state buyers. So definitely telling you that that higher end luxury kind of resort second home market, where it's a higher price point, those are predominantly going to be out-of-state buyers versus in-state buyers. And so just a interesting kind of takeaway on the breakdown of where buyers are coming from. A lot of times people assume that there's a very large percentage of people that are buying from out of state, which these are larger percentages than you would see in other places throughout the country. But the reality is, if you look at this over time, if you look at this over the last 30 years, those percentages are very similar to what they were in other years. And so there really isn't a big fluctuation from the number of out-of-state buyers. International buyers have been higher previous to COVID, but they really haven't recovered since COVID. And it's always a very, very small amount. And there's things like FERPTA and HARPTA, which are tax policies, which we've done videos on in the past, where there are in-state taxes if you sell property and you're not in a Hawaii resident. So that's somewhat of a disincentive for out-of-state investment, is when you do sell, you get taxed at a higher rate as a seller in the state of Hawaii. So the short story is that it hasn't been a very big change in the proportion or percentage of out-of-state or international buyers. And something that I've always noticed in our personal real estate business is that a lot of the folks that are selling and going back to the mainland are then replaced by somebody who is buying from out of state. So it's kind of a net zero, because it doesn't mean that every single person that buys from out of state displaces someone who's in the state. A lot of times someone who buys, stays here for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, ends up selling and going back to the mainland to be closer to family, or maybe to medical facilities or other reasons, life changes. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that if somebody comes, they stay forever. I can tell you a regular cycle in our business is that we will sell to an out-of-state buyer or we will help an out-of-state buyer buy, who then we will list that property 5, 10, 15 years later. And in some cases, they will be replaced by another out-of-state buyer. So interesting stats. I always love the stats. If you have any questions about this, or if you want to drill down deeper into your specific market, we can definitely do that. But definitely no big change historically in the number of out-of-state or international buyers. And it's definitely not the reason for prices going up so quickly. That's often who is blamed for price increases, are out-of-state buyers. But the reality is there is just not enough new supply in the state of Hawaii. So our finite number of properties and homes that are available to sell stay the same, and the demand from population increase and just people wanting to be here continues to go up, which will continue to drive prices up until we figure out a solution to our shortage of housing, because we just don't build enough new inventory in order to keep up with demand. And if there's a shortage of demand, or if there's a shortage in supply and an increase in demand, prices always go up. It's basic economics. So interesting data. Let me know if you have any questions. You can always reach out at dylan@buybigisland.com, or you can book a meeting in the link below if you want to talk about your specific real estate plans. And as always, appreciate you guys watching. I'll see you guys next week. Aloha.